couple of questions of my own that I'd like to start with, if that's okay, and then we can go to your questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Musa. Thank you. Just to remind everyone that there is a digitization seminar this afternoon, the topic that Rebecca just so eloquently introduced to everybody. There's a whole seminar on it at 2:30 this afternoon, so we'd welcome you all back for that. That's being sponsored by and hosted by ABB. Rebecca, if I can start with you and pick up on a couple of the themes that you've just put out there on digitization. Just taking a sort of macro view of the region and how it's beginning to adopt that culture, if you like. I mean, the data mining culture, the data transparency culture in the GCC, you could argue, is not that advanced yet. So how do you think the region and the industry that we're talking about, which is the petchem industry, can sort of take that leap, if you like, at this point in time? Is it an advantage that the data culture here isn't that advanced, and if you like, they can take that great leap forward into transforming their systems, or is it a disadvantage? And what's the hurdle that maybe they need to cross to be able to make these solutions adaptable here?
Well, I mean, I think you can think about it as trying a unit-by-unit approach or going to the full complex. I mean, I think it's very easy to start with a unit approach and see if you see the results. I know that every customer we've worked with so far has seen tremendous value in adopting a connected solution, a digitized solution. I think that some of the biggest challenges are, candidly, employees may think that this is going to take their job away. They may see it as a threat. If you have a software tool that can do all of these calculations, that can, you know, assess the situation, can determine how the process is running, are you going to really need me in the future? And the answer is clearly yes. I mean, this is not meant to be a threat to someone's job. It's really meant to overlay and provide differential performance. Someone said recently that, you know, I can see one screen, I can process one data point, but a connected, digitized tool can process millions of data points. And I think we have to look at it that way. As humans, we can only process so much at one time, but the tool set can process, you know, millions of data points at one time. And so I think that you probably have to take the leap. It's a little bit challenging. We all took the leap to cell phones at one point, right? And then, well, maybe to BlackBerries and then to cell phones.
There's no turning back now,
yeah,
unfortunately.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you just threw out a few figures at the end of your presentation of the additional value, obviously, that can be harnessed from using data and the efficiencies that can create on operations, $250 million, and then $1 billion just for the petchems themselves. So I think the argument of how this data gathering and efficiency tools is, nobody would argue against that, but it's more about the other factors of essentially, as you said, just getting there, getting the mindset to actually transition and trust that those new systems. I mean, you mentioned the cloud solutions, obviously, which were part and parcel of this, and a lot of the data obviously goes into these clouds where nobody really feels they have full control of. And again, from a cybersecurity point of view, or from just a data sovereignty point of view, where there are sensitivities around data sovereignty and sharing data. Again, do you think that is something that could prevent this region from progressing on that front, or has that sort of corner been turned already?
Well, there's clearly concern about the security of the data, but I think, you know, if the IT technical community sits down with, you know, say Honeywell, if we're your provider, you know, I think that we could convince you that we have a totally secure environment. I mean, depending on how much security you require, or, you know, the particular setup you have, we can do many different offerings to address security. So, I mean, I don't want to get into the specifics, but I think it all can be addressed based on how you want to set it up and how you want the offering, even to the point that, you know, it's a very dedicated server with dedicated tool sets.
And how important is it that you have, I mean, from models elsewhere in the world where you know, Honeywell, for example, has adopted all this technology, how important is it to have critical mass of lots of people participating to make you able to sort of develop these data processes, if you like, and the fact that the whole supply chain actually has to participate for it to be effective. And is that something that needs to be
I mean,
addressed?
clearly setting up some of the foundational tools it can be used over and over again. I mean, an Oleflex unit, as an example, is an Oleflex unit from the foundational basis. So the foundational toolkit can be used over and over, just like the connectivity to an asset, say, pumps or compressors. That foundational connectivity can be used over and over. But we customize it for every specific customer application set to make sure that we meet the customer's needs.
Okay, thank you very much, Rebecca. I'm going to go to Slido now. We have quite a few questions. I can't promise that we'll get to all of them. We have about 15 minutes. So, and I won't promise either that I'm going to always take the top question. But we will start with the one on the top of our screen. I'm going to put that to the gentleman on stage. The first one we have is, what would be the effect on Canada, on the Canadian energy and petchems sector, if Nafta negotiations fail? That's quite a broad question, but would you both like to comment on that, please?
Canada,
Yeah.
your neck of the woods.
You're
Sure.
nearby, but anyway.
Sure, I could begin. Well, I think what's become clear is that the administration could change the nature of Nafta somewhat unilaterally without Congress. If that were to happen, there's some discussion whether we would, in Canada, fall back to the previous arrangement, which was a FTA, free trade agreement, or if it would just be subject to regular WTO type of arrangements and tariffs. And so I think the outcome that we might see if it fails, and they're midway through the negotiations, so we'd still encourage the groups to come to a conclusion, because I think it's the right answer. But I believe what we'd face is some tariffs for production in Canada going into the US, and likewise from the Mexican perspective. And these would go both ways. And so this is why I'm hopeful that we could land on an arrangement where it works, because you're just taking some friction into the system by adding these tariffs between the US and Canada, and there could be some retaliatory moves and things like this. So in summary, optimistic, but in the case we would see some tariffs as we do see in other countries as well.
Okay, and I'm going to keep you to answer our second question there, which is very particular to Nova, and it's asking why the company is not engaging in polypropylene. Is that correct, first of all? Are you not engaging in polypropylene, and why not?
No, it's a good question, and it's something that is currently true. So we do have some propylene from our crackers that goes into the market, but we don't upgrade into polypropylene. It's a natural question because it relies on the same core competency in terms of ethylene production. And in fact, a lot of the technology downstream between polypropylene and polyethylene would be comparable. Our sister company, Borealis, indeed has significant presence in both polyethylene and polypropylene. So it's a diversification step that wouldn't take away from my discussion topic around focus in any meaningful way. And it's something we've not closed out as an option. We just haven't pursued. We did have polypropylene in the past on a small scale, but it could be part of the future going forward as well.
Okay, thank you. Fernando, I have a question for you. It's 2 or 3 questions down on merging corporate cultures, and you mentioned that when Braskem was formed, it merged 6 different entities, and obviously it's been a huge success story so far. But what have been the challenges of merging those different companies together? And obviously this region is going through its own phase of M&A and consolidation, and perhaps a bit closer linked, but what would you highlight would be any challenges there?
Well, I think the key challenge is to think about people and understand what is joining the family, let's call it. So, as I said, the Braskem culture is very strong. The 6 companies that originally formed Braskem had all similar ownership, so they already shared a lot of this base. So integrating them reinforced that culture and created a base for going forward. I think our approach, especially when we went to the international acquisition, was was one of humbleness. I mean, we believe in the principles, but we don't pretend to be experts in the US or in Europe or in Mexico. So integrating the local knowledge with our principles and doing this balance, I think is the key challenge. One aspect that took a lot of time and effort is to build trust on these new teams joining Braskem, to explain the culture in detail and what it means in practice, with examples through practice. We did employ a system where the number of Brazilians that were sent to those new geographies was rather limited. In the first acquisition in the US, for example, we acquired a business that had roughly 500 people. We sent four Brazilians only to help on this cultural aspect. But I mean, their key task was to communicate the principles and integrate the local reality with our way of thinking. So this balance between local reality, local history, and the assets we bought have different legacies with our core beliefs is the key challenge. We've been successful so far. Hopefully we'll continue on that path.
You mentioned in your presentation that the focus is now shifting to overseas acquisitions and partnerships going forward, and more of that. Is the GCC an area of interest for you?
We're looking at different regions. I think what Braskem brings is good expertise on running the processes, good expertise in the customer interface. We don't have the advantage feedstock. We don't have a lot of proprietary technology. So I think the GCC as a source of partners for global presence is a relevant arena. It's not clear to me if we could be a partner in building operating assets in the region here. I'm not sure what we could bring, but I mean, it would be very interesting to provide access to advantage feedstock that the region is full of. But we'll continue to look, as I said, to different regions to expand our model and bring some of our capabilities to bear, which our history has shown do create a lot of value.
Todd, if I can go to you and sort of reverse that question from the GCC perspective, looking at the Americas or looking at other regions, and would you see, I mean, you're owned by one of the corporates, if you like, here in the GCC, but what about companies here looking to invest elsewhere in this industry in terms of acquisitions or partnerships? Is that a natural tie-out for GCC petchem companies to be looking further beyond the region here?
In short, yes. I think it's a very natural conclusion, and one that I do believe is occurring. And when we think about the example of Mubadala and Nova, I know the discussions we have is how might we as Nova participate in the region. And so we can think about different partnerships or structures where our proprietary technology could be brought to the UAE, for example. And within the family of companies that are part of Mubadala, we also have discussions around how we might work better together. So that dialogue, I think, is only increasing. And so whether that's as a result of some crude oil price reductions or just necessary searching for synergy among this portfolio, it's very definitely the case where we start to think about how we might work together better, and whether that's in the region or more globally. And then going back to the talk earlier on the topic of Mubadala, we saw that global footprint. And so it's already, I believe, being applied that way quite globally. And so the portfolio companies that have come together for the petroleum and petrochemical sector represent, I think, an expression of exactly that aspiration. And then we think about how to do that best. And this is the balance I was speaking about that I think works in Nova's case. And so there could be other models, certainly, but that focus combined with that heft and that ability to aspire globally to growth and to think about how we could do that better together will only accelerate. When we, in another example, think about Geismar, where we acquired this ethylene facility in Louisiana. This was a standalone ethylene plant in a broader business with 500 acres of available land that could be used for derivative units, whether these are polyethylene on a Nova basis or on a joint basis with other partners within the family or out, or even other derivatives from a perspective of diversification. That was a pure sort of play acquisition. I think it's going to be the rarity as we go forward. And so building another dimension on the question would be, it's almost necessary for us to think about more complex structures, more creativity, some joint venture structures, because those pure, straightforward, obvious opportunities, I think, are going to be fewer than they have been in the past.
Yeah, there's a question actually, a few questions down on open innovation, which is kind of related to that in terms of, the new way of thinking is to cooperate and to see what solutions can be devised, with tie-ups like that, and open innovation, obviously, and sharing innovative ideas and R&D, which is obviously is what's going to keep this industry and any other industry going in the future. What are your thoughts on that in terms of, is there enough open innovation happening, or is everybody still very much sort of having this silo mentality of let's keep our research to ourselves for now and we'll decide later what to do with it, whether to share it? Please, we'll start with you, Todd, and I'll go to everybody for that.
Sure. I think we're starting to see that more in the petrochemical space. So I kind of think of 3 data points. One is in the upstream, the oil and gas business, it's long been very much joint venturing and sharing the risk and the opportunity that way across the various participants in that space. And so secondly, we saw a lot of integration. So IOCs, NOCs, and going downstream, and so integrating in this way. And I think kind of the third logical step is to increase the amount of venturing and creativity and innovation applied among sort of the petchems. And so it's no secret now that, in the areas where we have that network effect, so the U.S. Gulf Coast is classic, even within the region here, there can be, and it's necessary to have a lot of cooperation to manage the infrastructure and the mass balance and so forth. But I think there's room to extend that further. And so this would be among petchems. And then I would add a dimension that we believe strongly at Nova around the collaboration and that innovation that I spoke about, but a little more color on the customer and the supply chain aspect and opportunity that's there. We work with our customers and again their customers, and in a very creative way. And I'm really thrilled and proud of our team how they brought this together, because in May of 2016 we cut the ribbon on a facility in Calgary we call a CPA, Center for Performance Applications. And here we've installed actually all our customers' equipment. So we can have a blown film line, we can have thermoforming, we can have cap manufacturing for polyethylene caps on drink bottles and things like this, and other equipment as well. So basically anybody we're selling resin to is using these various types of equipment, and we've got that at our site. And what we do is we invite them to the site. They don't have to shut down their lines. They can keep their full-scale manufacturing facilities running. They can come to us, and we've had special built equipment, which is exactly as they have, maybe scaled down. But they can come and test their ideas. They can bring their secret sauce, and they can merge it with our resin. We're not totally altruistic. We'd love to have our products blended in with their own. But we can run complex films, 9 layers, for instance, and then immediately tear those off and go to our scientists, PhDs and technicians, and test all the attributes. Are we getting those outcomes that we want? But not to let that get in the way of that collaborative effort, that innovation, that joint creativity to create new products and new opportunities, and then just make sure you've done the paperwork and you're consistent with all your agreements and patents and so forth.
Making sure everything's secure. Thanks very much, Todd. Rebecca, I have a question here from the audience. It's a few questions down about whether Honeywell solutions are available to utility companies, as well as where you're supplying them so far. Is that something that's being implemented already?
Yeah, so I think many people may know Honeywell's a multi-industrial company, and Honeywell connected buildings, Honeywell connected utilities, Honeywell connected airplanes are all available through Honeywell. So if you're interested, I can connect you with the right people. So outside of the industrial space, we do have other connected products.
And there's a question here which is very technical, but how long does it take to implement a connected plant? I mean, I suppose it depends on the plant, right? It depends on the complexity of that. But again, in terms of when people are considering making the investment and what disruption that might cause actually in the interim.
Yeah,
training, etc.
I mean, of course, like any new system, you're going to have to do some training and some implementation, but the disruption factor is very low, and we can have a Honeywell connected plant, depending on the size, up and running in 4, maybe 6 weeks for a bigger application. So it's fairly seamless, and it's a very rapid deployment.
I mean, you mentioned the digital twin model, which is you go off and you do your model and then you come back and implement it.
Right.
But in that 6 weeks, practically speaking, what does that mean for the plant's operations on the ground during those 6 weeks? I mean, do you do it step by step, or does it mean it has to shut down?
No, the
for any
plant
period
doesn't.
of time?
No, the plant does not shut down. Everything, as you mentioned, the modeling is all done, behind the scenes through UOP, and then we would just connect into the particular tag points in your DCS system or in your sensor system that we would need to connect to run the model.
And you mentioned talent and the sort of having the right capabilities, obviously on site eventually, for operating digital plants or even implementing some kind of digital solutions to traditional operating plants. Is that something that you find in this region at all an additional challenge compared to others in terms of, again, the mindset and the capabilities of actually wanting to adopt those solutions, or do you just bring people in house for a few months and then train everybody up and then leave? What's the practicality of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think all those solutions are available. Some of our customers do request that they send their engineers to Honeywell UOP, and they spend time in our engineering facility, in our research facility with their service organization. And we have training programs that support all of that activity. Others feel that it's better to do the training in the region, and so we'll then bring the resources to the region to do the training on site locally. So it really depends. I think you can customize it however you'd like to.
Okay, well, I think we have time for maybe a couple more questions. Mr. Musa, there's one here specifically on Brazil. Since green PE is advantaged in Brazil, could capacity be expanded? And what does the demand outlook look for that?
Yeah, the green PE product it's a very interesting product from a sustainability point of view. But from a market demand point of view, it's still a niche product. We do have plans to continue to invest in that arena, green PE and other renewable-based chemistry and polymers. We set up a very interesting, large biotechnology lab in Brazil, have over 40 PhD working on biotech processes to work on as I said, renewable-based chemistry and polymerization. So we'll continue to invest in that. At the right time, we'll expand the green PE portfolio and capabilities. Since the beginning, back in 2010, we've expanded the portfolio to basically all PE families. I mean, low density, linear low, high density now is available with green ethylene, and at the right time we'll make a new investment in capacity.
I have one more question I'd like to put to you all before we break for coffee, and we have a session actually, and a speaker after coffee who's comes from the sort of finance part of the equation, and we'll be looking at a bit more detail into the challenges of that, if you like, financing new technology, financing digitalization, financing the industry in general. But just to put it to you all, what your feelings are on how in the last couple of years, obviously with energy companies generally under some pressure because of oil prices dropping, etc., how has that filtered through to your companies? And how has that impacted investment, or obviously it's impacted feedstock in this region as well, feedstock costs and their comparative advantage, but how has it impacted the investment culture, if you like, or outlook in your companies in terms of the revenue that's coming in?
Well, if I may start, if you look purely at the petrochemical sector, and our results have been very good in the last few years. So I don't see, in our case and in many of our competitors, any pressure of reducing investment. On the contrary, I mean, the expectation is that continued growth. Todd mentioned a lot of investments. We're doing a lot of investments. Our project in Mexico was a $5 billion investment. There are many multi-billion-dollar projects being done around the world. I think it's a confirmation of the strength of the petrochemical industry. And
this region as well, the
yes.
GCC NOCs are beginning to sort of diversify more and more into downstream, because obviously, because of the margins and yeah. Todd, your comments on that?
Yeah, I agree with Fernando. I think when we saw the oil price decrease, it really brought about a little more thinking about sort of worst case scenarios and downside scenarios and the probability, and as I was talking about, that uncertainty range really. And when you think about the volume, and I'll just speak to ethylene and polyethylene as our core, but the numbers are quite astounding. So, globally at 200 million pounds of polyethylene, even slow growth of 2 or 3% per year requires a number of polyethylene world scale plants to be built annually. And so it's sort of cyclical, and you'll see pauses and you'll see accelerations. And so we grow in a stepwise function, as we all know, but that demand keeps ticking along. So even though we might see a period here in 18 and 19 globally of supply coming on in excess of demand growth, that very quickly turns around, because the planning cycle, as we know, is 3 to 5 years for making changes there. So in summary, we have to keep our eye on that long-term horizon with sensitivity around those ranges, but that demand is going to keep pulling us along and just finding that sweet spot.
Rebecca, I'll let you have the last word on that.
Yeah, I mean, as a technology provider, obviously, I mean, I think the downturn in the oil prices impacted the projects that were going forward. So we had a slowdown in demand for technology and demand for our resources during that time. So we took the opportunity to continue to press forward hard in development of new technologies. And the Honeywell connected plant was one of the outcomes of that investment, but as well as our advancements in paraxylene technology and in Oleflex or PDH technology and other refining and petrochemical technology. So we really used the opportunity to plow forward for the technical investments.